All right, we're live. I
We're
believe we
live.
should be. I'm just gonna pull up the page real quick. It's a little check. Hello, everyone. If you're listening to me babble, I'm just making sure everything is every good and going. Okay, awesome.
Yep, we
Yeah,
are
Wednesday.
Wednesday,
Happy Hump Day,
the
everyone.
18th.
It's Wednesday, the 18th. Welcome back to the Freedom Model Q&A. My name is Matthew Sparks, and this is my good friend and coworker, Daniel Pelorge. We are private instructors here at the Freedom Model for Addictions. If you're interested in learning more about private instruction or any more of our content, you can check us out at thefreedommodel.org. We also have a plethora of online content that we launched for a subscription fee. And that can be found at online.thefreedommodel.org. It's called the Freedom Model International, which we'll probably talk a bit about as we sort of delve into the questions here. So I hope you all have a wonderful week thus far, and we're going to go ahead and just dive right into it, if that's okay with you, Daniel.
That's great. Let's do it.
All right. And again, feel free to type in the chat if you have anything or any comments or anything like that. Engagement is much appreciated from everyone. So question one that we got is, hey guys, Freedom Model, and I'm devouring the podcast, but because it's self-choice, my mind is saying that means you can drink then. Let's drink. And I don't want to drink. Can anyone help? This is a pretty foundational question, so I'll throw it to you, Daniel, and you go ahead and start.
Yeah. Well, you can doesn't mean you should, right? But I think very importantly, it's asking ourselves like, okay, what would I get out of it, right? Because I can put it this way. When we think we're powerless, obviously it's like a bad idea, right? I can't. But then we come to the realization that we're not powerless, that we can choose. Well, if we're making that choice, what do we think that we're getting out of it, right? Like we were talking about on the last podcast, there's this whole idea that substances have the ability to enslave us, but there's also this belief that substances have the ability to fix and manage our problems. So I think when I've been in a number of deprogramming groups before, and I know that in some of them there has been that push for like the idea of like moderate drinking. But I think if you're like, well, I don't want to drink, well, don't. There's nothing pushing you, there's nothing forcing you, there's no reason for it really. Like I said a couple of times, I do as much crack and heroin as I want, and that's absolutely none, right? Like I know I could take some, but what would I get out of it? I don't see any benefits in doing that in my life today, so I just don't. you know but yeah, I can definitely doesn't mean I should, and that's something that we've emphasized a number of times in the book.
People have already recovered from the virus.
That was strange.
Someone jumped in our chat for half a second.
Oh, that's what it was. Okay, that was. I guess I can hang him out in the lobby, whoever that was. Anyway, back to the question, which was, or as Daniel said, just because you can do something obviously doesn't mean that you should do it. There's a lot of things that we can do in day-to-day life that we absolutely should not do, like run over people with our car and things like that. But if you're having the thought, because you technically have the ability to drink, but you say you don't want to drink, but you're having the thought, let's drink, there's a part of you that either wants to drink or it's so ingrained in your associations with everyday life, your processes, that you're just thinking about it all the time. Because if it's something that you used to do all the time, then it's going to take some time for it to go away. I've heard, I think it's Mark and Michelle in the past, they kind of just, or maybe it was even Steven in the past, they described it like, take the same route every single day to work in your car. And then after 30 years, the route completely changes. You may find yourself driving the original route without realizing it, and then suddenly be like, oh man, I'm going the wrong way to work. That doesn't mean you're powerless about your route direction on the way to work. It's just something that you've done forever. So you're going to kind of think about, because you have so many associations with it. It's so ingrained in you at this point that it's just common practice. So like I said, it's one of two things, or maybe a bit of both. You either still want to drink, so you need to take a look at why it is that you still would want to drink, or it's just an association that you have because you used to drink all the time, or you're in some place that you used to associate with drinking, or what have you. And if it's the latter of the two, then just know that that's okay. It's not a craving. You're not at risk of suddenly being hijacked. You don't have to want to drink just because you're thinking about it. It's just an association. It's just a thought that will pass. So the important thing there is not to freak out, because we've sort of ingrained in people this belief that just because you think about a drug all the time means you have to want to do it. But it could just be an association because it's been a part of your life for every day for a lot of people, as it was for myself for years. So it takes a little while to stop thinking about these things if you make a significant change in your life. But yeah, good question. That's a pretty foundational one. I highly recommend checking out the book. It addresses that pretty early on. So yeah, on to, unless you got something else, Daniel, we'll go ahead on to the next one.
Yeah, no, like I was saying, that's something that I noticed in a few people in some of the deprogramming groups, and we have been accused of that and we're associated with those things at a moment.
Yeah.
Because like some people do encourage moderate use, and we're not condoning or condemning it. It's like, listen, let's look at the actual facts surrounding substances and substance use. And once you have all the facts, then you can make a decision that makes sense to you, right? But either way, you don't have to jump into anything right off the bat. But yeah, that whole idea, like, when I saw that, I was like, well, I don't want to drink. Well, don't then. It's that simple.
Simple as that.
It's like there's nothing forcing you to, and you don't have to drink just in order to prove to yourself that you're not powerless or whatever. Like, all you have to do is look at everyone else who's just doing just fine. So yeah, I think that was the thing that was to bring up, was that, well, I don't want to drink. Well, fine, just don't. There's nothing wrong with that.
Right. One of the goals of the information that we're providing is to make the choice basically seem like not a big deal. The choice that I make to drink or not to drink in my life is about as inconsequential as deciding what I'm going to put on my sandwich for lunch. Like it's either I want it or I don't want it, or I just don't like it, period. Because it's an inanimate object, period.
Exactly.
So the goal in our program is to dismantle a lot of the beliefs that make it not an inconsequential decision. It becomes this powerful other thing, this otherworldly thing almost, with these powers to hijack you and cure all these mental health ailments and all this other stuff. And we really get down into the weeds of dismantling that sort of stuff. And that's the kind of stuff that could make you still want it if you're finding yourself saying, I don't want to do this, but I do want to do it, which I know might sound incompatible or crazy, but I understand that state because it's one that I lived in, where you feel like you don't want to do something, but you also want to do it. That's because you still want to do the thing, but either the consequences are so high that it makes it extremely risky, or everyone around you doesn't want you to do it, or that you shouldn't be doing it. And that's sort of the dissonance of those things colliding and being at odds. You still want to do the thing is the primary point there, though. So anyway, we'll go on to the next question.
Yep.
Here we go. This is a great one. What is the best podcast for someone who has never heard of the Freedom Model? This is for someone I just met who is shooting meth and being forced into rehab. Daniel, you want to go ahead?
Yeah. Well, I thought about it for a while, but then I was like, you know what? The one thing that I think, if you're going to watch just one thing that has like such a big impact, would be to watch Steven's TEDx talk.
Right? Yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah, it's about 15 minutes long,
it's
and he goes through a lot of stuff, and then if you go to his blog, he provides all the citations for everything. It's pretty awesome. So I'd say that's, if you were only to have like a brief intro for someone just to get them to pique their interest, that would probably be it. But then after that, you got the book, which a lot of people probably know you can get a digital copy for free, or get a paperback copy. And then there's the podcast in that order, like in the order that we've done it, for people who really want to delve into it. And of course, now we have FMI where people can go through the entire program and so on and so forth. But yeah, for an intro, just to give people an idea of like how we differ from pretty much everyone else, I'd say Steven's TEDx talk is pretty much like, it's the heaviest blow that we have to the whole industry.
I don't disagree with any of that. Obviously, the one that I would immediately recommend is our own podcast, which is The Addiction Solution, which can be found on your typical podcast platform, Spotify, Apple Music, and the likes. As far as like which episodes to start one, you could even start from the first one if you wanted to, which is Addiction is Not a Disease and That Matters, I believe.
Yeah.
Which is actually based on the name of a really famous academic paper that argues for addiction being a disease, called Addiction is a Disease and That Matters. And our stance is obviously that it's not, and that matters. But yeah, for your friend who's I think you said who just met a shooting meth and being forced into rehab, a lot of times whenever your life is that chaotic, it can be difficult to obviously like sit down and really ingest information at the level of like coming from a podcast or something like that. So this person, if they could get away from the 12-step program entirely and get out of that rehab system, that would obviously be for the best, because they're not going to be saddled down with this powerlessness narrative and diagnosed with a basically chronic relapsing brain disease that they're going to have to fight for the rest of their lives. So if you can figure out how to pull them out of that before it sinks too deep, then that would be great. But like I was saying, it can be hard enough to find stability enough to ingest a lot of this information. And we do offer other methods of treatment. Like we have a private retreat that you can go to if you need to find some stability and really be a way to focus on the information, which can be incredibly helpful. I would say the only thing that if I was ever going to force myself to find something beneficial about the inpatient rehab that I went to, which was entirely AA based, was that I just got like a vacation out of it. It was 30 days of being somewhere else out of the chaos of my life. Unfortunately, that was accompanied with massive amounts of indoctrination and ideas that took me years to unlearn. But if you need some more stability or some more intense learning styles, if you're kind of caught up in the chaos, we do have alternatives for that. But obviously the podcast is a great resource. And a step up from that, I would say, would be to read the book. But yeah, got anything else, Daniel?
Yeah, no, that was pretty much it. I'd mentioned that the podcast in the order. We have over 50 hours now.
There's a lot
of audio. Yeah, but I agree. If someone's still getting loaded like on a regular and are considering going to rehab, like, they might be a good idea for them to find a spot to like quote unquote dry out for a little while and get their thoughts together. But it's doable either way, so I don't think that's an obligation.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying you have to do that. Just so everyone listening, you don't. One of our big things is you don't need to go to rehab. You don't need rehab, period. People just need varying levels of presentation of information. People learn different ways. Some people have different needs. You don't have to go to the retreat.
Yeah, and it's not like in private instructions that everybody's always sober at all times too. You know what I mean?
Right.
So we can work with you. Put it that way.
Right. We will find a way to help you to figure out which way you learn best so that you can get the information. So yeah, contact us if you can get a hold of him. Feel free for him to tell him. Feel free to reach out. We'll be happy to talk to him or her. Okay. So next question. I'm really kicking myself this week. I had set a goal to not drink for April and ended up binging last weekend. It's a cycle that I've been in for a while that really wears on me mentally. When I binge or drink multiple times a week, the negative consequences start to really eat at me. Self-esteem takes a huge hit. The same reason why I ended up giving up drinking years ago for quite some time. I really like being healthy. I don't have any real social anxiety like I did in the past. I would love to get back to where I was pre-pandemic, where I really started to feel confident and good about myself for the first time in my life. Sitting here contemplating if having alcohol in my life at all is worth it at this time. It still has some benefits to challenge for sure. You got all that, Daniel? I know that was a little bit. You want to
Yeah.
go ahead?
Yeah. So I was reading this and I was like, I set a goal to not drink. Like, in a acceptance and commitment therapy, they call that a dead man's goal. So it's like anyone who's in the cemetery who can achieve the goal that you put yourself is obviously not necessarily much of a goal, because the entire cemetery didn't drink for the month of April. But what I noticed is a lot of focus on consequences, right? So obviously, that's very far from the idea of challenging benefits, right? It's like, well, if I think it was today. Yeah, it was this morning. They came out with another show, and Mark was talking about this, where it's like, going to see your boss and telling your boss, you should really make my job like really horrible and hellish, and it should really suck even more, and then I might make a decision to quit. Like, that's not how we look at things, right?
Right.
So I think there's a lot of benefits to challenge, and there seems to be a lot of all or nothing in here, right? I set a goal to not drink, and then I ended up binging, right? And I think you could probably discuss that, but I know I was watching some stuff on how when you stop yourself from doing something for X amount of time that you really want to do, once you let go of those breaks, you actually end up doing it even more. And I was looking at this within the context of people that go on diets, and how, it's like, well, I'm not going to eat that cheesecake. I'm not going to eat that cheesecake. I'm not going to eat that cheesecake. And then finally, when they cave, they eat the whole goddamn cheesecake. Whereas
Right.
if they hadn't repressed themselves that entire time, and they just would have been like, well, I'm just going to have like a little slice, they would have just had that little slice, and that would have ended it, right? But yeah, all or nothing views like that are not beneficial, and that's why at the very beginning of the book, we bring up this idea of like, don't make a decision right away, right? And in no long-term decisions, whether that's complete abstinence or moderation or whatever the hell you're gonna make up your mind at the end, but don't do that right now because you don't have the information. So yeah, I think it was very spot on when he mentioned that he had benefits to challenge, because he's talking about all this negative stuff, and then it's like, I'm still drinking, right? So
Right.
it's like, well, there's obviously something in there that you think that you're getting that's more important than all this other stuff, right? Like, you're talking about your health, and you're talking about being worn down mentally and self-esteem, you know, but yet, you're still doing it. So yeah, there's something there that you have to challenge, because there's a pretty big likelihood that whatever's driving that is just smoke and mirrors. There's nothing behind it. So yeah, that's pretty much my take on that.
I would basically just reiterate what it was that you just said. If you find yourself in a position where you're having a hard time sticking to stuff like this, it's because you're basically creating a scenario of resistance, right? Rather than making a life choice that's about getting something, the life choice is about giving something up. It's about resisting something for as long as you can. And doing that for something that you think has benefits for you, or something that you really like, can be really difficult. You're living in this like weird state of deprivation where there's something out there that you really want to do, but you're constantly having to tell yourself not to do it, which is kind of how the AA operates in a nutshell. But our approach to it is going to be, okay, well, so what is it that you like to do about it? What is it that you like about doing this thing? What are the reasons that you want to do it? Because emphasis on the consequences here clearly isn't enough to compel you to make a lasting change about this. And I personally, and I'm sure Daniel to an extent too, I don't believe that that consequences and negative motivators are really good sustainable motivations. Like running from consequences or not doing something out of fear isn't nearly as powerful as doing something because you genuinely want to do it and you believe that you're going to get something out of it, and it's going to make you happy, etc. Like you say that Did you really like being healthy? You don't really have any social anxiety like you do in the past, which is great. So I assume that the implication there is that you don't need to drink to be social, which is great because you don't and no one does. It's just pretty embedded in our social culture to a certain extent. You can get back to feeling confident and good about yourself, and you can do it with alcohol or you can do it without alcohol. If you decide that it's better for you to do it without it, and I certainly wouldn't disagree with you there because alcohol is pretty bad for you in terms of your health. It needs to be about what it is that you're gaining instead of what it is that you're giving up. Your perspective should be, I'm doing this to get something, not I'm giving this up to avoid these things. Those may sound like the same thing to some of you, but it's actually a world of difference. The perspective shift there is massive in terms of maintaining motivation and doing what you want and actually making a decision that you want and sustaining the change, all that stuff like that. So you're going to do what you want to do, period. So if drinking is what you want to do, you need to figure out why it is that you want to do that, which may or may not be tied up in a bunch of mythology, which reading the book or diving further in our content will help you sort of untangle. Yeah, once you address that, it shouldn't be that difficult to sort of move beyond it and become healthier and achieve what sort of goals it is that you want. Got anything else, Daniel? Did I say anything wrong?
No, I think when you were talking about motivation, that reminded me of a video that I did a couple of weeks ago called "The Carrot and the Stick," and it's a lesson. Yeah, it's a lesson I teach on the very first class, and why we should not focus on consequences. So I'll repeat the story here for the people who haven't seen the video. So basically, you got two ways to motivate a donkey to go down a road, right? You have the carrot and you have the stick, right? Say if you take a stick and you whack the donkey real hard with it, like he's going to move, right? Now there's a few issues to that. He's not necessarily going to move in the direction that you want him to move. He's just going to move away from the stick, whatever that makes sense to him. So you might have to whack him a bunch of times in order to get him to go in the direction that you actually want him to go. And the other problem is, well, it's not very pleasant, right? So the donkey's not going to enjoy it. And if he starts thinking that he can't escape the stick, or no matter what he does, he's just going to keep on getting whacked. Yeah, there's a point where he's just going to give up and lay down. And once he's laid down and he goes, screw that, I don't want any more of this. At that point, you could beat him to death. He's not going to get back up. You don't have those problems with the carrot, right? When you're looking at the carrot, there's a few advantages to the carrot. First off, you can put the carrot right in the direction that you want him to go, right? So you just aim the carrot in whatever direction you want him to go, and he's just going to go. And he's going to keep on going forever, right? Because he always has that, like, oh my God, the carrot is so close. I'm almost there, right? So you're going to drive that. It's just going to keep on driving. So yeah, we have to get away from this idea of like, okay, maybe I should whack myself with the stick a few more times, or maybe I should just get a bigger stick, or, maybe I should get someone else to whack me with a stick, like a sponsor or something like that, right? Because I'm obviously not doing life properly. And start looking at like, well, what are the carrots I want in my life, right? Like what's important to me. And yeah, like you said, he mentioned health, and that's one of the main drivers why I don't drink. I'm
Same.
just like, dude, it makes me feel like crap, like even
Total
if
garbage.
even if there's part of me that enjoys it to a certain extent, and that's pretty subjective when you sit down and think about it, but like, no, I do not want to have a hangover ever again, ever. It's like 0, 0, 0. And my girlfriend, who's never had a drinking or drug problem in her entire life, now, I'm 48, she's going on 51, and she told me the same thing. She's like, you know what? No, I don't want to get drunk. It's like, no, my body just can't take this stuff. Being hungover at 20 and being hungover at 50, it's not the same deal.
Man, being hungover at 28 is still awful.
Yeah.
I don't want to do it at all.
Oh yeah, no, I would not. Ugh. I don't know. I just shudder when I think of, there's some people that wake up like that, like every day. I'm like, oh my God, couldn't
do it. Don't have it in me.
No, I couldn't pull it off. It's like, no, sorry. But there was a period in my time where that was fine and that was cool. And it was like, oh, I didn't mind paying that price.
Right.
I I didn't mind because last night was so cool, right? No, that's over.
Right.
You know, and not only that, but it's like, you know, I don't think I could have those magical last nights anymore because I know better, you know.
Right.
So
Okay, cool. So basically, Daniel gave an excellent representation of sort of the positive versus negative motivations there that I was talking about. So the key there is to take a look at why you want to do the thing, basically.
yeah,
Because you're going to end up doing what you want.
exactly. And if someone's struggling, you know, it's okay to ask for help. Like, you know,
Right.
we got the free book, we got the free podcast, but not everybody's gonna have enough with that, you know. We have Freedom Model International, we have private instructions, we have retreats. There's no shame in asking for help. Like, you know, like the best athletes in the world, they have coaches, right?
Absolutely.
It's like if you want to have a really good grade at a topic that you're struggling with, it's a good idea to hire a tutor, right? That doesn't mean anything about your ability to learn. It's just like, no, just the book is not necessarily always enough for everyone. So I think that that's something to point out, right?
Right.
Because it's stuff that we see repetitively, whether it's you know, in the groups or even in just personal discussions. This belief system is so deeply ingrained.
Right.
I've
It's
had
so
people
much to
argue,
detangle, right?
oh yeah, I've had people argue with me that they've never even taken a drug and they're like, no, addiction, blah, blah, blah. And they're going to explain to me. And I'm like, dude, like you never even smoked a joint. Like, please stop. You know, you're watching like this mindless stuff on TV and in Hollywood movies. And then you think that that's the reality. You know, I've talked to some pretty hardcore users and they're like, oh no, I'm not a crackhead, but you know, like, so I'm like, well, does that kind of person exist, you know, by the very definition that we're discussing? And they're like, well, yeah. And I'm like, well, but you just told me you're not. So yeah, but there's worse than me. Dude, you live in a homeless shelter, you don't have anything left. Like, how bad does it have to get before you go, I'm at a really bad place? Like, no, it's not the way it works. So yeah, like I said, you know, if someone needs that extra help, you know, or just wants a shortcut, you know, because you might not want to read the book 30 times before, you know, like that's a thing too. It's a question of time. It's always better to like pay someone to just get the cliff notes sometimes.
Or just
So
get it explained in different ways, right? Like you have
exactly.
plenty of different ways of explaining lessons, and I have my ways of talking way too much and explaining stuff.
Yeah, no, exactly. We all have our ways of learning and our ways of teaching, and I think that that's important that we have that diversity because, you know, obviously every individual is different and they need to hear the same message in a different way in order for it to sink in.
Right. All right, cool. So we'll go ahead and move on to the next one. I got to day 5 sober 2 times in a row and messed up. At least I've been drinking a lot less often, which is good, but I only smoke when drinking, which makes it doubly bad. I signed up for the online program. I'm going to continue with it today. I know I'm not powerless and that alcohol can only change things physiologically and not my mind. Therefore, it's like an active placebo and it cannot relax us as that's a product of your mind. However, despite knowing this, I drink anyway and I'm very worried. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, first off, I wanted to talk about like counting time, right? Counting time is one of those things that
counting sober
really,
time, just to be clear for anyone.
Yeah. You know, there's this idea that no matter how much time you have, you're still just as close to your next drink or high or whatever. And when we count time, we're basically giving power to the substance, right? We're like, we're telling ourselves, well, I've been stronger for the substance for X amount of time, right? If I were to tell you, like, I can't even tell you, we were talking about scuba diving last time because I'm like I was really into scuba diving for a while, and I haven't dove in a while, but I can't really tell you how long it's been, right? I'd have to really sit down and analyze it to find the exact moment. I don't think I could come even remotely close to the day. Maybe the month, maybe. But I'd have to dig around for that, and I'd definitely have to dig around for the year, you know. Um, but the day, I don't think I could even answer that. So this idea that we're counting time for some particular reason is not helpful. So I thought that was something that needed to be mentioned. And then, he says, like, at least I've been drinking a lot less, which is good, but then I smoke, which is bad. So like, there's a lot of moralist ambivalence here, right? It's like, well, I'm doing something good versus something bad, which is highly subjective, But I signed up for the online program, so that's really cool. Congratulations.
Welcome.
And yeah, exactly. I hope you go through the videos, take some notes, and go through the workbook. And then the monthly Q&A is like super cool. And then of course, if you're watching this and you have other questions outside of all that, you're welcome to mark them down into the Facebook group, and we'll do our very best to answer them. Obviously, we can't answer all the questions all the time, but we do go through a bunch of questions on the regular. So there was that. And then I think this is something that's really important, because I think most people really don't get this. It's like, I know I'm not powerless, and that alcohol can only change things physiologically and not your mind,
But
right? But then he goes, therefore, it's like an active placebo. Placebo is super, super powerful. Like, the power of placebo is ridiculously strong. And people really don't get this. It's like, I have a few formal trainings in hypnosis, and one of the trainings, and I always giggle when I think about this. I had this training that was like, hypnosis isn't real, right? So I have a master hypnotist who's giving me a training on hypnosis, and he's like, no, hypnosis doesn't exist. It's not real. I'm like, what? And I totally get what he was saying, but yeah, he was basically saying that the what we're doing is we're creating a ritual. We're creating an excuse for the person to be able to make a decision in their life to change a certain behavior, right? So there's no magic, there's no mind control. When you go see the hypnotist, he doesn't put you into this weird buzz thing when your eyes spin around.
no,
And
it's
then,
not nearly that exciting.
yeah, he doesn't go in and like delete stuff out of your brain and then just add in new programs and none of that, right? All he's doing is creating this ritual in order to so you can give yourself permission without any excuse, without any reason, to just make a positive change in your life, right? Because like, if, for example, I think smoking is the greatest example when it comes to hypnosis, right? So people will go to the hypnotist and then they quit smoking, right? Even though when you look at the efficacy rates of hypnosis and smoking, it's less than 25%. I think it's
Right.
23 or 22%. It's pretty low. But what's interesting to note is that, the people that it works for, the people that really wanted to quit, but they didn't need to go see the hypnotist, or did they? Because if they didn't go see the hypnotist and they just quit, then they'd have to find a reason within themselves why they didn't quit sooner, right? They'd have to find a reason to explain to their entire family and friends and everything why they didn't quit sooner. Whether is if they go and they do this ritual, then, it's like, well, you quit smoking? Well, yeah, I went to go see the voodoo doctor. He did his witch magic on me, and that's that. I don't want to smoke anymore, right? So it's when we're talking about placebo, it's the same thing, right? I remember reading stuff about how even if you take the pill and you know that it's placebo, it still has an effect. It still works. So
Right. They've
you
had
take
that experiment done with people taking what they think is anabolic steroids and then telling them that it's not anabolic steroids. And then people actually still get some of the weightlifting benefits. They've done it in a few other contexts too.
Exactly. Right. So, this whole idea, well, I know that it's not doing this physiologically to me. Well, it's still doing it to you in a sense because of your belief. You know what I mean? So I think that's where the issue is going on, right? Um, it's an active placebo, cannot relax us. That's a product of our mind. But like you said, it's an active placebo, right?
Right.
When we think of like heroin, for example, right? It's gonna like slow down body functions. But if you associate that with being relaxed, right? Well, there you go. Heroin relaxes you. Now it's not doing that physiologically, right? And that's why we have a chapter called Learn Connections. But in a sense, it is doing that. So it's like, oh, intellectually, I understand that it's placebo. Yeah, but you're still going to take the placebo, right? Until you come to realize that the sugar pill is not doing anything for you from what you actually want. At that point, there's zero purpose in taking a sugar pill. But as long as you still believe that the sugar pill is somehow working some type of magic, right? It will. I don't know if that makes any sense.
That makes sense. Let's say, since I think you said you signed up for the online program. I don't know how far this person obviously has gotten into it, but in the later chapters, there's a good deal there's a good deal of time that we spend talking about the quote unquote benefits of drug use. And I think somewhere in the middle of the book, we talk about stuff like the license to misbehave and things like that. So as you delve into the content, this should become, what Daniel just explained, should become more and more illuminated. But basically, so much of the experience that you associate with the ingestion of alcohol or even with the act of smoking is one that you're producing. So say that every day you come home from work and you drink a 6-pack, and that's you're done with work for the day. That is a signal that you're on the couch and it's time to not think about anything and it's time to relax and kick up your feet. Well, you can get to the point where you believe that you need that 6-pack to achieve that state. So you need to have a 6-pack every day after work to become relaxed, to kick your feet up. But really what you've created is this really embedded association and signal to yourself that, okay, I have opened the first bottle of the 6-pack. I have now given myself permission to relax. I have now given myself permission to not think about other things and to watch television. But you're attributing all these things that you are doing to the substance at that point. It's not the alcohol. The alcohol isn't turning on the TV and putting on whatever TV show and making you sink further into the couch and not think about anything. You're giving yourself permission to do those things, and the association is profoundly influencing the experience. Daniel mentioned the power of belief. That is one of the biggest things about the freedom model, is the power of belief. Just how insanely powerful your belief system about these drugs and your ability to use them are. Like, can you moderate them? What sort of effects are they giving you? What do they mean to you? Do you even choose whenever you ingest them? All of these beliefs have a profound impact on which drugs you use, how often you use them, what are the contexts that you use them, etc. And this isn't even getting into the set and setting of drug use, which also profoundly can influence your experience of the drug. So, like I said, if you're early on and diving into the online program, this is stuff that you'll get to. There's a whole lot of content to unpack there with this topic, and we could probably have a several-hour show just talking about the perceived benefits of alcohol versus the reality of it, and the big difference between the two. But I would advise you to just keep trekking along. It is good that you're drinking less if that's your goal to do so, obviously. You also don't have to smoke every time you drink. You'll be able to undo that as well. So there's hope. It's going to be okay. You got this. Just keep going forward in the program. And obviously continue to let us know if you have any questions. So the next question, and bear with me for a minute. This one's it's got a little bit of text to it. Hello, I've heard a lot in the podcast about, and this is in quotes, trauma doesn't cause addictions because there are people in third world countries who have trauma who don't have addictions. Can I ask where this research is so I can further read it and cite it? Also, is this specifically alcohol and substance addiction, or does research include other kinds of problems too, e.g. sex, gambling, addictions, etc.? I have a therapist who talks a lot about trauma linked to addictions, which is starting to bug me, and I agree with what I have heard in the podcast as it sounds right, but would like research to give myself more confidence in my disagreement with my therapist. Also, on another note, my therapist has said if I don't have connection in my life, I'll be at high risk. I got real mad hearing that, but I also fear maybe it's true, as I've honestly been breaking my sobriety a lot more since reading the Freedom Model and leaving my 12-step group. I took off all my controls, got rid of my sponsor, and did the exercises in the Freedom Model, but found myself just keep saying to myself, well, today I feel like going to a brothel, so I would choose it and live with the costs. Unfortunately, I am getting exhausted with this, and I am seeing sobriety as the happier option, but still choosing to hope for my acting out to make me happier, because occasionally it does. It's just not consistent. I know you, let me know if you need me to repeat anything there, Daniel. I know that was a good bit, but
Yeah.
go ahead.
I got this stuff on the tablet.
Okay,
here.
cool.
But yeah, when it comes to the citations for trauma, this is on pages 88, 89, and 90, where it's basically in the chapter Learn Connections, right? That we have like, and it's pretty big studies. And the bottom line is only 1 out of 5 people with mental illnesses are said to cause addiction have addictions. The rate of remission from addiction is twice as high as the rate of remission from other mental illnesses. And addicts who have other mental illnesses, quote unquote, co-occurring disorders, are just as likely to recover from addiction as those without other mental illnesses. But first off, I'm just thinking, like, why would you want to fight with your therapist, right?
That can't be fun.
I don't know. It's like, is this person being helpful to me? And there's, I don't know. So I was in therapy for 3 years. Basically, I went to go see a therapist regular for 3 years, and this was a long time ago. But I didn't disagree with him. I didn't agree with him on everything, but I didn't like openly disagree with him about stuff. You know what I mean? I was just like, okay, that's what he thinks. That's fine. But then again, he didn't really tell me what to do much. He would just encourage me. He would just encourage me in whatever direction made sense, because he could see that I was passionate about it, or, there was something I wanted to change. And he was like, oh, that looks interesting. Tell me more about it. And and that's how we would go. But yeah, when there was that mention of risk, as another note, my therapist has said, I don't have a connection in my life. I'd be at high risk. Risk is a cause and effect statement, right? So that doesn't really fit in. It's like, oh, I don't have any connections. All of a sudden, I'm going to get loaded by default.
Yeah, like something's going to happen to you, right?
Exactly. Right. It's not that straightforward, right? When there's obviously, if you're sitting around at home with zero opportunities in life, zero money, and you don't really and you've never really sat down to think about anything that you like, your chances of wanting to get high are likely going to be higher than someone who's got tons of other passions in life, tons of activities, tons of money to do stuff. This just makes sense. But that doesn't mean that the person that doesn't have anything, is in a risky position, in the sense that, like, oh, a bomb of being an addict could just blow up right next to them. Like, that's not the way it works. And then, of course, we have to look at, a lot of other stuff, like what you were talking about earlier, drugs, set, and setting. Just to get back to that last one, I think when we're talking about placebo, there's a beautiful study that was done at McGill University a while back, where basically 2 out of 3 people were given placebo and told that these were entheogens, like hallucinogenic drugs, got a hallucinogenic buzz off of this, right? It's like, oh, here's some mushrooms. They have 0 psilocybin in them, but here's some mushrooms. And, 2 out of 3 people felt like they were on mushrooms. So that says a lot about the power of placebo. But yeah, when he was talking about choice here, right? Well, so I'll choose and live with the costs. Okay, well, that's the second thing. First, we have to really break away the idea that we don't have a choice, right? We have to get into this realm of like, well, I'm choosing to make the decisions I am making, right? And But then there's that second part is, okay, well, why are you making that choice, right? If you find that so problematic in your life, yet you're still doing it, there's reasons behind that, right? And that's what we have to get to. Um, I like to look at it from an apple and oranges perspective, right? So imagine if I was to offer you $5 or I was to offer you $20, which one would you choose? Now, pretty much everyone always chooses the $20, right? Because that's objectively more, right? And so I could pretty much like guess everyone's decision on that. But if I were to offer you apples and oranges and say, which ones do you want? Well, that really depends on your preference. That really depends on what you like, right? And if you hate apples, right? Well, I could offer you like 50 apples or one orange, but you love oranges, you hate apples, you probably still take the orange. Now, someone who's neutral would think that that's crazy because that's like, damn, you could get 50 apples, but you're taking one orange. Like, what's wrong with you? Or someone that likes apples would think you're even crazier. They're like 50 apples and you chose the orange. But to the person who hates apples, that totally makes sense, right? But when we start looking at it from this viewpoint of like $5 versus $20, which is, like objective difference, well, subjective difference can sound or look crazy, right? It can be like, oh my God, why would this person choose to like do this? Well, maybe it makes them the happiest that they think they can be, At that point, you'd have to like sit down and go, well, why do you think it's making you so happy? And is it really making you this happy? And are there, would a different level of use make you happiest, right? Because again, he was like, he's talking about happiness, and occasionally it does. It's just not consistent, right? So yeah, obviously you're getting something out of it, but not necessarily every time, Back in college, probably the best teacher I had, she brought this up to us. She said, you have to find out whatever purpose or purposes, substances serve in this person's life, right? And that's pretty much what we do at the Freedom Model.
Right.
When we're talking about purposes, there doesn't necessarily have to be one, right? Like there's a huge difference between like, what purpose does drinking beer at the barbecue serve versus what does it serve getting drunk alone at home on Friday night, right? Those are two, they could be the same amount of drug, they could be the same drug, so on and so forth, but they won't necessarily serve the same purpose. You're not doing it for the very same reason. So having this all or nothing viewpoint can be harmful in the sense that like, hey, maybe you could be really successful at having beers at the barbecue and just cutting out drinking on like Friday night alone at home, right? But if you're like, well, I have to stop drinking, then, you might really not enjoy the barbecue because you're feeling like you're being left out, like what you were saying earlier, you're depriving yourself. And then you're just in this position where it's like, man, sobriety sucks. Well, it doesn't have to suck. It doesn't have to be enjoyable. Like, you just have to find what's going to work for you as a person. And, life is not black or white. There's various shades of gray. So, again, there's a lot of presupposition of black and white thinking in there. So I would highly suggest, as usual, reading the book. And, I think it's a good idea if people become members of FMI. I really liked the video program. I really enjoyed it. I remember when we got access to that, I was checking it out. I was like, oh, man, this is really cool.
That was so cool.
And even better if you could, like, that's why we're around, man, for private instruction, like, if I had to go back like 19 years ago and I would have I think that's what I would enjoy the most, just having like one-on-ones with someone who actually knew what they were talking about and who could help me sort through this stuff. But either way, yeah, those are a variety of options. And that's that for that. You probably can answer this trauma stuff a lot more than me.
No, so I just have some additional there's so much to get in with trauma, and that's like a whole burgeoning scientific field that's going on that's such a rabbit hole we don't need to get into right now. But one of the big things here, and on the subject of developing countries, gets into the causes versus reason thing. And I just want to preface this by saying that this doesn't minimize how difficult anyone's life is. making an assessment of how justified someone's reasons for using are. No one's reasons are better than the next person's. No one's life is more difficult than the other person's, which makes their drinking or drug use okay. So I just want to preface it with that. So if we're on the context of developing countries, if you grow up somewhere where you're really low in socioeconomic status, or there's a lot of really difficult, unique problems that you face, or that your population faces, life generally is more challenging in a number of ways that maybe it isn't in other places. This doesn't change the causes for drug use. The cause is still you selecting the drug because of whatever benefits it serves to you. It just changes the reasons. So your environment, in this case being the developing country, supplies the reasons here, which are different than other people's reasons. It supplies life difficulties, celebrations, which could be a reason for drug use. It can supply your beliefs about the drugs, what sort of benefits they're having. All of these are just reasons. That's the main point here. You're just getting reasons for drug use. Your brain, as a citizen of this hypothetical developing country, is not any different or any less capable than someone from like an extremely privileged country who also is choosing to use or to not use drugs. It's just not. Your reasons can just be different because you come from entirely separate environments. So I think that's like the really big thing there. Whatever you end up choosing is going to be whatever is driving you towards happiness. And it doesn't have to be happiness. It could just be whatever makes you not feel terrible, whatever makes you feel better or distracted, or, whatever it is that you believe that the drug is doing for you. So yeah, the big thing there is that it's reasons, right? So the environment here and the hypothetical country is just supplying different reasons for the individual. And regardless of how terrible the situation is, the person has never at any point caused to use the drugs. No one, that's just not happening. They just have maybe more compelling beliefs about their reasons for using them, or different beliefs, or whatever it is. The person is still an autonomous individual with a perfectly functioning brain, hopefully, that gets to make the decision whether or not they ingest the substances, period. So yeah, that's what I had to say about that.
Yeah. No, like I said, I think it's that whole idea of like arguing with a therapist. I'm just kind of like we don't know what type of therapist it is, but obviously you don't necessarily have to get into these discussions with your therapist, if you're there for other stuff.
Right. So your therapist is probably concerned here because the narrative of trauma causing addictions is so prevalent. And basically, if you buy into the idea that something happening in life that is so emotionally severe that you can't handle it, or something really horrible happens, is that there's some sort of a chance that you can lose control of yourself and go start ingesting substances, basically, that you somehow are drained of agency because of the severity of the problem. And now you are no longer able to resist using drugs. Now, under that paradigm, there is risk there, but you're not ever forced to ingest drugs. So that just doesn't apply. Nothing is causing you to do it. So if you take a step out and you realize that trauma isn't causing you to use drugs, no matter how severe the trauma is, this sort of like completely falls apart, right? So I would imagine that's probably what's going on. We don't know. We're not, in the therapy room with you, and we're not here to comment on any sort of mental health work that you may be doing. The additional thing was that your therapist said that if I don't have connection in my life, you'll be at high risk. Again, like Daniel said, high risk implies that you're at risk of something happening to you, as if like you're going to black out and then like, your corpse is going to walk around and go ingest a bunch of substances, and you're going to, suddenly come to and then deal with all the consequences. Like that's just not going to happen. You don't need connection to choose to do something that you don't want to do. If you still want to do it, then now you're playing the game of resistance that we keep talking about, where your life becomes more about resisting something that you want to do rather than getting something that you want, which is like, it's exhausting, man. You don't want to live your life like constantly thinking about not doing something. That sounds horrible. Wouldn't you rather be living like in pursuit, like doing things that you want to do, or doing nothing if that's what it is that you want to do, right? So so the idea that you need connection kind of enforces this idea that you need a replacement, because you're always going to want the substance, whether that because they think your brain is hijacked or what other substance, but you don't have to always want the substance. And again, that's a huge chunk of what the freedom model is about, which is addressing the reasons that you want the substance. What do you think it's doing for you, etc. And this is when you can bring the hypothetical third world country back in. There are plenty of reasons provided to you from your environment that you could use to drink or use drugs. Some are really, really severe, like major trauma, accidents, tragedy, things like that. Some are just that maybe you like to get loaded, and that's perfectly valid and perfectly okay. And we need to get better about letting people just acknowledge that they just like getting loaded, because that would make a lot of this so much easier. But again, you're not at risk for anything happening to you. Getting drunk isn't something that's going to happen to you. You get drunk. You pick up alcohol, like, because it's something that you want to do, right? So I'm not advocating for you to go to war with your therapist here. That's probably not going to be an enjoyable experience. You could recommend them to read the book. That might be very helpful, or to check out some of our online material or the podcast. Like we've said a whole bunch before, we have a plethora of content online for your therapist to check out, because if they're really bought into the idea that things are going to cause you to use drugs independent of your own agency, like, there's going to be a lot to deal with there. You're probably going to butt heads a lot if they've sort of basically internally diagnosed you as an addict or an alcoholic, or you're suffering from substance abuse disorder or what have you. Just, try to get them to read the book if that's the case. But yeah, that's, you don't want to, I don't want to go to war with your therapist for you, and I don't want to advocate for you to do that. That's going to be horribly exhausting. So, but don't worry. The good news is you're not at risk of something happening to you. If you don't want to do it, you're not going to do it. I promise it's going to be okay. So just take relief in the idea that if you don't want to go do the drugs or don't want to drink the alcohol or whatever, you're not going to do it. It's okay. It doesn't matter how severe your trauma is or anything like that. If you don't want to do it, at the end of the day, you're not going to have to do it. So you're going to be okay. I promise. Do you have anything else to add, Daniel?
Yeah, you were talking about this stuff, and it just reminded me of, I actually was talking about this with my brother last week. This is something that happened to me back when I was going to NA a long time ago, and we were talking about that, connection and purpose and happiness.
Right.
And so I told, he was like, oh, so basically you have to build like this happier life, where you're just happier with the drugs. But I'm like, no, you don't.
Nope.
And he's like, what? And then I told him that I was reminded of this guy. His name was Danny. And I'll always remember Danny, because Danny was probably the most negative person I've met in my entire life. Right? He was so negative. It's like the kind of guy who'd complain that you had to pay taxes on the lottery ticket because he won like $1 million, right?
Right.
And so he was so negative all the time. But there was a part of him that was likable, and he had a lot of like sober time, right? So I talked to him once in a while.
A lot of those guys have a whole bunch of sober time. I saw that a lot too. Like the most negative, unhappy people.
He was so negative. Like, he made everyone else look like happy to his degree. And one day I asked him, I'm like, Danny, if your life is so goddamn horrible, why are you still abstinent? And he just looked at me and he goes, dude, it would be even worse if I went off and got loaded. And, that really got me to think, like, exactly, that's the bottom line. You're going to choose whatever path seems the best for you, whether that's to make you happier or less miserable. That's just the choice we make. And that choice is not, it changes from day to day, but that's also based on our belief systems, right? Like, if I believe that substances have like all these magical powers and all these benefits, well, maybe I don't need them today, but then I could do 5 years, 10 years, and then, eventually I end up in this slump, in this really bad place in my life, and then I relapse because I still believe all this stuff about drugs, right? But if I didn't believe that stuff about drugs, it's just like, well, yeah, now I'm just in like this not so fun part of my life, but that's not going to like drive substance use. So yeah, I just wanted to mention this story about Danny, and how we just we don't it doesn't always appear like we're making choices that are rational either way, right? Because like
Right.
to me it made no sense whatsoever that Danny was not doing drugs, right? I was like, dude.
But I'm sure it made
It's like,
perfect sense to him, right?
oh yeah, and I've heard this in the rooms like a number of times as well, where it's like some grumpy old guy and he's like, why don't you just go have a drink,
Oh yeah,
meaning
I've
that
heard that a bunch.
yeah, then they won't be grumpy like anymore, or they'll just be a happier person. It's like, and that says a lot about what the person believes about substances as a whole as well, but that's a different story. But yeah, I
Yeah,
thought we
in the
should.
freedom model, you have the freedom to be miserable too. Like
Oh,
you can, right? So
you get to do it
we don't
either
want
way
you
you
to
want.
be.
You choose the level of substance that makes sense to you, and it's as simple as that, Eh, so I don't know. We've been an hour. We've gone through the questions. I don't
Oh
know
yeah,
if
that
there
was
was
all
any.
questions. I don't believe that I saw any.
Hold on. Yeah,
I'm gonna double check to be sure.
yeah. I got off the live.
Yeah, I'm
thing
not
too.
seeing any coming in the feed or anything. But if you guys have any other questions, feel free to email us. My email address is down there, as is Daniel's. So if you have any specific questions or anything that you want to specifically talk to either one of us about our backgrounds, or even just general questions, feel free to hit us up. We're also on Facebook. We're in the Freedom Model group that this is broadcasting in as we speak. You can DM us on Facebook. I'd be happy to try to help you out in whatever capacity that I can. I'm sure Daniel will as well. But I think that's a wrap, Daniel, huh? What else you got?
Yeah. Yep. No. That's pretty much it. I think I'll check our calendar. I'm not too sure exactly when.
It's
our
going to
next
be
one-
the 1st is the next one.
Oh yeah, June 1st. Okay.
June 1st, baby. Summer.
Cool. Yep. Summer's coming up. It's starting to be nice around here. So.
Thank you, Lori, for being here. Appreciate it. But yeah, check us out online, thefreedommodel.org. Check out the Freedom Model International, our new subscription-based online curriculum, which involves a Q&A. You get the audiobook, the workbook, the regular book. You get a whole bunch of stuff. Online.thefreedommodel.org. Check out our podcast, which is called the Addiction Solution Podcast, which you can get on Spotify, Apple Music. We also post them to YouTube. So we have a YouTube channel with a whole bunch of content on it there too. You can check us out there. Again, you have any questions, feel free to DM me or Daniel, or hit us up via email. We'll be happy to help you out. I've been gone out of town for like the last week or so. So my incredibly long Facebook responses with academic literature and all that silliness have been gone for a little bit, but I am now back. So all of you that are asking questions about more brain-oriented stuff, I will be happy to bore you to death since I have returned with my answers. But yeah, other than that, I hope everybody has a wonderful remainder of your week, and we will see you around and on June 1st.